Okay, so picture this. You're walking down the street and all of a sudden something catches the corner of your eye. You start to glance over and you realize a guy is waving his hands up and down at you, going frantic, and you don't know what to do. Your first thoughts are he's throwing up gang signals and you need to run in the opposite direction as fast as you can. Get away, get out of the situation, run, and don't look back. And then you start to realize something's different. You look back and you realize it's just a sweet old man. And you think to yourself, he's not trying to throw gang signals up at me. He's trying to tell me something. Flashback, and you're sitting back in your old high school classroom where you learned about sign language. And you remember seeing the teacher and her motions of hello. Flash forward, and you realize the man's doing the same thing. All he's trying to do is tell you hello. So, you took it the wrong way because you didn't know how he was trying to communicate. He was saying hello in sign language and you didn't even realize it. Even though he wasn't talking, he was still trying to communicate with you, which is a simple way of communication. It's just one of the many forms, and there's so many different forms of communication. And this is one that I like to touch on because it's such a good example that speaking is not only the way to communicate. Also, let's say you run into a friend and she doesn't seem herself at all. She's down in the dumps, she keeps looking around, and you really don't know what's wrong with her. Her eyes are wandering the ceiling, and she's just not herself. So you go to ask her what's wrong, and you find out she's had a horrible day and her boyfriend broke up with her. So all of a sudden, you start asking questions and making sure she's okay. You wouldn't have known this at all if you could have not had communicated her emotions. Also, you wouldn't have not been able to read her emotions if she wasn't acting the way she was. She communicated her emotions with you without speaking at all. So you were able to figure out what the situation was and dig farther and deeper into it with another form of communication called speech. Communication can also be stuff like facial expressions and moods. She might have looked at you a funny way, or she might have been crying, which would also be an indicator of how she was communicating to you. There's also lots of different ways to communicate. Just some that we've touched on today are speech, hand signals, and communication, and emotions. Emotions was how your friend was communicating with you. She was telling you something without even speaking. The man was communicating hand signals with you. He was telling you something without saying a word. And speech is just another regular one, is what we all think of what communication really is, when it's really so much more. Communication can be very broad or very specific. It can be specific by just pointing out one thing, or it can be very broad with talking about communication as a whole, which most people think is just speech, but it's not. It's so much more, like I said, like hand signals and emotions, and even just the look on somebody's face. We might not all think communication is just one thing or another, but we do know one thing. Communication is the key that connects us all, and it helps everyone in the world learn more and be better people.